The biggest matchup when the Texas A&M Aggies take on the South Carolina Gamecocks is Max Johnson reading the secondary and not making mistakes.
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On Aggies. I'm your host, Andrew Stefaniak. Thanks for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every single day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Today, we're going to be talking about the biggest matchups as the Aggies get ready to face the South Carolina Gamecocks coming off the bye week. And the first one that just stands out on paper to me is Max Johnson being able to pick apart the South Carolina secondary. Graham Mertz of Florida a couple ball games ago was able to throw for, let's get the exact number here, was able to throw for 423 yards and 3 touchdowns against South Carolina. And I don't think Graham Mertz is a very good quarterback. I think that him and Max Johnson are very similar quarterbacks, game managers type quarterbacks. I don't think Graham Mertz is this incredibly awesome quarterback, which tells me now, game script played into that a little bit. Florida had to kind of fight back in that game. But in that game, Florida, who's a team that runs the football pretty well, didn't run the ball because they were throwing it a lot. And I think that for a team like Texas A&M that has struggled to run the football, we're going to talk about Texas A&M running the football and their ability to do so here in a minute. But I just think looking at this, it says to me, if Max Johnson has a big game, if Max Johnson's able to go over 300 yards in this ball game and throw a few touchdowns, I think the Aggies are going to win this game. But you have to, he needs to be smart, pick this secondary apart. We talked about on yesterday's episode of Locked On Aggies, South Carolina does not get a ton of pressure. They're not out here getting pressure on every play, getting a ton of pressure. They have a few sacks, not a ton, a fine amount of sacks. So point being, I think that Max Johnson is going to have time in the pocket. I know that we've been hating on the Texas A&M offensive line a little bit, which is, we've looked at the PFF grades, we've looked at everything. I think it's fair. But I will tell you, I do think looking at this, looking at the matchups, you have to go, man, you're going against two of the better teams when it comes to getting after the quarterback in the conference in Tennessee and Alabama. Now you get your bye week. Everybody gets to get a little bit healthy, and then you take on South Carolina. I think this offensive line, are they going to dominate? I don't think they're going to dominate, but I think they're going to give Max Johnson time in the pocket, which is really all he needs to succeed. So, yeah, I think Max Johnson needs to make sure he's reading the secondary well. We're going to talk about the receivers a little bit as well, but I think the receivers are going to be open. I don't know. I don't have any reason. Like Pearsall for Florida was open all game long, and I think that Anaya Smith and Evan Stewart are both better than Pearsall. I think Texas A&M is going to have receivers running open. We'll talk about the receivers in a minute, but I think Max Johnson will have open targets running downfield. He's just got to find them. And if he's able to find them, he has time, and he's picking the defense apart, Aggies are going to score points in this game, and I do think the defense is going to be able to hold down South Carolina. The next thing I have here is Texas A&M secondary versus the South Carolina wide receiver. South Carolina has some pretty good receivers. And, we've talked about it. I'm going to be honest with you. This right here is the type of team that scares me a little bit when it comes to their downfield passing attack. And I'm going to tell you why. Before the bye week, the Aggies take on Joe Milton. Joe Milton might have a cannon for an arm, but if he fell out of a helicopter over the Atlantic Ocean, I don't think he would hit water. He's not very accurate. So, that's why the cannon, who cares? It's like a pitcher throwing 94, but they can't throw a strike. Who cares? And I think that Spencer Rattler is a guy that if there's a receiver open downfield, he'll make you pay. Against Tennessee, Tennessee made it clear that they wanted to push the ball downfield if they could. They wanted to push the ball downfield. That was a goal. And so they tried to push it downfield. Milton wasn't hitting those passes. I don't think Rattler will make those mistakes. I think if those receivers, if you give him 7 deep balls, he might miss one or two. But if you give him 7 deep balls and these receivers have a step on the Texas A&M corners secondary, I think Spencer Rattler is going to make you pay. And that is why, just being brutally honest, this game a little bit scares me. Should Texas A&M win? Yes. Is it at home? Yes. Is everything pointing in your direction? Of course it is. But this is the type of team / quarterback that a little bit scares me. I think Rattler, I knocked him a lot early on. And I said, the numbers, let's go through the numbers on him for the year again. They're 1,724 yards, 11 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. And remember, y'all, I'm recording this before the Missouri game because I'm heading to on a fishing trip. So that is before the Missouri game, those numbers. They're, through 6 games. Let's see what that's. I think I did the average yesterday. It was something like, it was a little over 250. He's been fine. You could argue he's a top 3 quarterback in the SEC, but I think that these numbers aren't extremely terrifying. But I think knowing what he can do is what's terrifying to me. Knowing that Rattler, listen, if he has receivers running open, he will hit them. He will. And that's why in segment 2, we'll talk about the defensive line and pressure. We'll talk about that. So that's why this scares me, ladies and gentlemen. This truthfully scares me because if the receivers are open, I think Rattler's going to find them. And against Tennessee, I know that Milton missed some of those guys. There were some open receivers downfield. So this secondary will have to lock down. Otherwise, this game could turn into a shootout. And with Texas A&M struggles scoring in the red zone and issues there, I don't want this game to be a shootout. I talked about it yesterday. I want this to be a ball game where the Aggies win it like 31-17 or 28-17, 24-17, something like that, where you hold South Carolina under 20, you score, 20 in the 20 to 31 range around there. Like, that is just the type of football game I want this to be. So this secondary has got to shut down these receivers, or at least do a good enough job, at least shut them down long enough that the Texas A&M pass rush can get home. Because if the pass rush is having an off day, this could be scary. So that is my second biggest matchup, and you could argue that it should be the number 1 matchup with Max Johnson picking the secondary. One of those two should be number 1 in my opinion. But yeah, this secondary, if they get picked apart, this could be one where you get upset on your home field. So you've got to find a way to make sure you're not letting him pick you apart. The last one I have here for segment 1 is the Texas A&M wide receivers against the South Carolina secondary. We'll talk about the running game as well. Will Texas A&M be able to run the football at a well? I don't know. I really don't know. We'll see. I don't know how much confidence I have in that. We'll talk about it here in a minute, like I said. But so these wide receivers, and this one right here is becoming a common theme, because I do think the receivers have to be open every game. Max Johnson, I think he can make throws in tight windows, but I'd prefer if he didn't have to. So I think that's why the wide receivers getting open is going to be a big key in this ball game. You want to see them running open all game long. We want to see separation. We want to see Max Johnson have multiple reads open every possession. Is that going to happen? No. I mean, there's not going to be somebody open on every play, but we'd like to see that. So you need to see your guys running open. If these receivers are running open, I've always said it. I believe if given time, Max Johnson will find the open receiver and put the football on him. I think a lot of quarterbacks at this level, will do that if they have time and there's open receivers. So it all works in together. You have offensive line has to give Max Johnson time. The receivers have to get open. That's part of football. It's part of sports. It all works together. That's what makes it so fun. So my next biggest matchup in this ball game is the wide receivers being able to get open against the South Carolina secondary. We are going to talk about the offensive line and what they need to do and how they need to succeed in this football game coming up right here on Locked On Aggies. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn Jobs is the perfect place to go. If you're an employer looking for employees, LinkedIn Jobs is your spot. If you're fresh out of college looking for a job, LinkedIn is the place to go. It's an app that helps employers find employees and people needing the job find a job. It's just an all around great application that really helps a lot of people out. You got to check it out. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Another matchup that is going to become common theme here on Locked On Aggies is the offensive line being able to succeed against the pass rush and the defensive line of South Carolina. The offensive line is going to be scary the whole season. And, it's going to be scary. It's going to be scary knowing that at any given moment, a pass rush can get after Max Johnson. And I mean, the Tennessee and Alabama game, you got to feel bad for Max. I mean, he was not only taking big time hits, but he didn't have the time that I think he deserved to find some receivers downfield. So this offensive line has got to give him time. I said it a little bit in segment one, but I think this game is a good opportunity for this offensive line to be better. It's not Alabama. It's not Tennessee. We know how, this is right now. I know they haven't played Missouri yet. This is a 2-4 football team that could be on his way to being 2-5. This is not a great football team. It's not a great pass rush. And the offensive line has to find a way to give him time in this football game. You're going to have to throw the football to win this game. I think, will you be able to run it? I don't know. I'm not convinced on Texas A&M's ability to run the football. I don't know if I'll be convinced on that the rest of the season. You have to find a way to throw the rock in this ball game. And it's going to come down to the offensive line giving Max Johnson time. The pass rush for South Carolina, like I said, they're averaging a couple sacks a game right now. And I said that on yesterday's show. If I could offer this to you, Texas A&M fans, and I say, hey, listen, Max Johnson gets sacked. You have two options. Option one is you can just take it now. Max Johnson gets sacked twice against South Carolina, or you take the gamble. He can get sacked no times. He can get sacked once, or he can get sacked more than twice. I would take the 2 sacks and move on because I don't think 2 sacks don't scare me. 5, 6, 7 sacks is what scares me in this ball game. So you don't want to let that happen. But this offensive line, I think they're going to give Max Johnson time, and I think they need to because if they don't, it's going to be a tough game, for the Aggies, knowing the kind of passing attack that South Carolina has. The flip side of this, the defensive line versus the South Carolina offensive line, we just kind of alluded to it. Once again, it feels like every matchup's big in this game, but this is another one that you could argue is one of the most important ones based on the fact that if the defensive line isn't getting the pressure we have seen over these last few weeks, Spencer Rattler can and will pick you apart. I said it a minute ago. He's a solid quarterback. He's a great player, I think. That, a great player. Will he go on to an NFL career? I don't know, but a good college football player at worst case scenario. And I think that if you don't get pressure on him, this is a game that you could lose. I think a lot of people are going to look at this football team, whatever happens against Missouri, whether they're coming off a big win over Missouri or they lost to Missouri and they're 2-5 or whatever the record is. I think that And yeah, it'll be 2-5. So whatever the record, if it's 2-5 or 3-4 heading into this ball game, this has been a disappointing season for South Carolina. But they do have a passing attack that is scary. The defensive line has to help out this secondary by getting pressure. They need to get pressure early and often in this football game. If they get pressure, I don't think this South Carolina team is going to put up many points. I don't. I think they put up 14, maybe 17 on a couple big plays. I don't think that's been enough to beat Texas A&M at home. If they're struggling to get pressure, or please don't let this happen, or if Coach Durkin draws up the 3-man pressure, I think this South Carolina team could score some points, and this game could quickly become in question. This defensive line's got to get pressure. If they get pressure, I really don't have many concerns about this football game. If they don't get pressure, that is when South Carolina could put up points. This could potentially become a shootout. And can the Aggies win in the shootout? I don't know. Which, hey, we'll find out because they got to take on LSU and Ole Miss coming up. But I don't want this game to be a shootout. Here's the deal. You held Tennessee, they said under Coach Heupel, they were like 0-6 in games they didn't score 30 points. They're now not because they didn't score 30 points and were able to beat Texas A&M. So they did a good job holding the game that some might thought would be a bit of a shootout to not be in a shootout, but they weren't able to get the win. Beside the point, this defensive line has to get pressure if the Aggies want to win this game. The next thing I have here is Jake Johnson against kind of the South Carolina defense, whoever's out in coverage guarding him, needs to do a good Jake Johnson, I think, needs to have a good game. Looking at the numbers so far on this season against South Carolina, they have bled a little bit when it comes to tight ends. You look through the stats, in most of these games, the second or the first, second, or third player when it comes to receiving is the tight end, and I've seen some touchdowns right here against Florida. The tight end for Florida, his name is Eugene Wilson III. I want to make sure. No, not Eugene Wilson III. It's this guy. Arliss Boardingham. Yep. Had 5 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown against the Gamecocks. So, and it's happened before. They held Brock Bowers in check for Brock Bowers, but he still had, I think it was about 60 yards on about 6 or 7 receptions. So he still, was part of the game plan. I think that South Carolina can be beat with tight ends. Jake, this could be a bit of a coming out party for him. He could we see 8 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown from Jake. I know that he's had a few. I mean, he's not been bad this year. He's had some receptions. He's had some touchdowns. We've seen the Johnson to Johnson connection play out a handful of times. But I do think this is a football game where he could be utilized well and be really helpful in this ball game. You could see Jake have that game where he really puts up some big numbers and helps his football team win a game. So I want to see Jake have a big game here. I said it. I think that South Carolina can be beaten with the tight end. So, Jake, this is your shot to go out and have a big game. Maybe get yourself 100 yards. Have the brother-to-brother 100-yard touchdown connection would be awesome in this ball game. I would love to see that. The last thing I have here is the run game for both sides. I think that the goal here is I think you can live with the stalemate, but I would love to see Texas A&M win the ground game in this football game. South Carolina is not a prolific rushing team. Neither is Texas A&M. But I think at home against a defensive front that I'm not completely sold on in South Carolina, I think the Aggies should be able to run the football. I'd love to see some big explosive plays. We've talked about that a lot. I'd love to see some explosive plays. I'd love to see some different positive things in the run game from Texas A&M against this South Carolina team. So we want to see that play out. We want to see this talented. We want to see this offensive line push. We want to see Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens and Amari Daniels, if he is to get some snaps. We want to see them run the football and run the football well. So I'd love to see a big chunk play. I talked about that some. I'd love to see a chunk play, some big yards from these guys. They said that on the broadcast against Tennessee is like, you look at this team's last few games, they haven't had really many chunk plays. We want to see more chunk plays in the run game. So, I think I think a lot of it comes down to the offensive line of Texas A&M. I think they have got to get pushed to create holes for the running backs. I've said watching back the tape, there's some plays, there's some holes that the Texas A&M running backs missed, but also there's a whole bunch of plays where they get handed the football and then they're looking at the sky because they got tackled in, a snap of a finger. So, this offense, it has to work in unison. The offensive line has to get a push. The running backs need to find holes. And if the Aggies are able to run the football in this game, they are going to cruise through this ball game. I feel confident saying that. If they can't run the football, that's going to be when you have to win with Max Johnson's arm. I still think you can do that, but I would love to have balance. We talk about it a ton. Love to have balance. Will they have it? I don't know, but I think if they do have it, this is a football game. The Aggies are going to win handsomely. We are going to talk about why this is a must-win. This is the must-win of all must-wins. Coming up right here on Locked On Aggies. Prize Picks is the best place to go wager on over-unders, to go wager on prop bets when it comes to professional sport. I love Prize Picks. They offer everything. If you like to bet on football, they offer quarterback, they offer yards, rushing yards, touchdowns, receivers, they offer touchdowns, receiving yards, over-unders, running backs, rushing yards, receiving yards, touchdowns, over-unders on everything. They'll give you a line, and you pick, is it going to go over or is it going to go under? It is a ton of fun. You can do it for hockey, goals, assists, NBA, rebounds, assists, points. It is a ton of fun. I love using Prize Picks whenever I am watching football, whenever I am watching basketball. It is the best app to go and wager on sports, to go do your over-unders. I highly recommend it. Just a ton of fun to use. Go check it out. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege, promo code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Now we're going to talk about why this game is such a must-win to me. And it really, I mean, here's the deal. Am I going to predict the Aggies to win this game? Yes. Do I think they'll win this game? Yes. Do I think they'll win it handsomely? I do. But if you don't, oh boy. I'll tell you this. I do feel more confident about the Aggies taking down Mississippi State than I do them taking down South Carolina. Now, I know I feel good about both games. I'm not really, I can't say that I'm super concerned about the Aggies winning this football game, but I will tell you this is a ball game that I think we have got to see. We have got to see this team leave with a win at home in front of your crowd. If you lose this game, like I said, we're looking right now at 7-5. If you are able to take care of business against South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Abilene Christian, and lose to Ole Miss and LSU, we're looking at 7-5. If you're able to steal one from LSU or Ole Miss, that's when we're looking at 8-4. If you steal one, 9-3. If you somehow steal both, and then take care of business in these games. But what we do not want to be looking at is a loss to Ole Miss and a loss to LSU and a loss to South Carolina and 6-6. 6-6, if you lose this game to South Carolina, I think that is when the Coach Fisher needs to go conversations are going to pick up a ton of steam. If you lose this football game, I don't even know what to say. So, looking at this, you have got to find a way. You got to win this game. You have to win this game. This is a must win. If you don't win this game, you're going to lose recruits. People are going to transfer out. Your Coach Fisher's probably gone. I just think that this is going to be an all-around fiery storm of awfulness if you lose this football game. I think this is, without a doubt, a must-win game, which, like I said, I think the Aggies are going to win. I'm not concerned about Texas A&M winning this football game, but it definitely is a must-win game. If you don't, oh boy, I don't even want to think about what it's going to look like if the Aggies aren't able to win this football game. So you got to find a way to win this game at home. I don't think you're going to struggle to do that, but all these matchups we talked about on today's episode of Locked On Aggies, you need to do a good job of winning those matchups. Win those matchups, win this football game, you're coming out of your bye week healthy. You need to win this game. You need to get ready to rock and roll for some of these more significant games coming up against LSU and against Ole Miss. Ole Miss, of course, being the game before LSU. But you got to find a way to win those football games, or one of those football games, to really salvage this season. We got to see it play out. So you can't lose South Carolina. You have to win this football game, or it is going to be a dark, dark time in Texas A&M football. That is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Aggies. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Like I said, I am on a trip with my grandparents and my mother right now. We are in Ocala, North Carolina on a fishing trip, hopefully catching a ton of fish. So I did pre-record a few episodes this week. I will come back to you this weekend, regularly scheduled. I'll bring you a show on Friday, show on Thursday, show on Wednesday, a couple of pre-recorded. And then, of course, the Friday show will be coming to you live heading into this matchup, and so we'll have a reaction show from whatever goes on in the South Carolina matchup. Thank you all for bearing with me as I'm out here fishing with the family. It's been been a great time. It hadn't happened yet. I hope it's been a great time. Thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day today, and we will see you tomorrow.